I am Alice Brooks, and I am the cinematographer for Tick, Tick, Boom, and this is the Go Creative Show.
Hello and welcome to the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. My name is Ben Consoli, and today we speak with Alice Brooks, Director of Photography for Tick, Tick, Boom on Netflix. Alice, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Ben, so much for having me again.
There is so much to talk about with Tick, Tick, Boom. Of course, we had you not that long ago for In the Heights. So it's like twice in about like a few month period. So first of all, we love your work and very excited to talk to you about Tick, Tick, Boom because I fell in love with that movie today when I watched it. And there's so much to discuss. But before we get there, I want to quickly mention Filmmakers Academy. Master your craft at filmmakersacademy.com. Thank you guys for sponsoring this episode. And of course, remind you all to follow us on your favorite podcast app, as well as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. So, Alice, you were on for In the Heights. Were you working on In the Heights and Tick, Tick, Boom at the same time?
No, I wrapped In the Heights, and on our last day of filming, at noon or at lunchtime, my agent called and said, Lynn would like to send you the script for Tick, Tick, Boom. It's a movie he's going to direct. And he wants to meet with you on Tuesday. So suddenly, wrapped In the Heights that night. And 3 days later, I had an interview with Lynn for Tick, Tick, Boom. And I knew nothing about Tick, Tick, Boom. I knew who Jonathan Larson was, but I knew he wrote Rent, but that's about all I knew about Jonathan.
Yeah, I was the same when I went into it this morning. I turned it on and I'm like, I don't know anything about this movie, but I love your work and I'm like, I'm sure it's going to look great. And immediately I'm like, oh my God, Jonathan Larson, the writer of Rent. This is kind of his story, or at least one of his previous works that's sort of semi-autobiographical. So I immediately loved it right off the bat. And it's interesting to me because Lin-Manuel Miranda just came off of In the Heights, which is his show, now directing Jonathan Larson's show. And there's just like this musical movie world going on now with you and he. And it's like you kind of have your own little family going now for these movie musicals. And I think you're bringing such new, great energy and life to this particular genre. I love it. You guys must just be so excited about it.
Thanks, Ben. I mean, it's interesting you said family because while we were making Tick, Tick, Boom, everyone kept saying, this is like a family. It was a long process making the movie. It was about 2 years because COVID, we shut down for 6 months for COVID after filming for 8 days. So we all really bonded on this really special level. And all through COVID, once a week, we would have something called Tick, Tick Zooms where we would get on Zoom and it would be like every single person, 500 people, cast and crew, every single person was invited. And you'd have almost at least one representative from each department. Usually about 100 people joined. And it really got us through the early days of the pandemic. And then we went back to work and we all just felt so bonded to each other. So it was a family.
I can imagine working on scenes like Boho Days, for instance, when everybody's in the apartment and just knowing that this is one of the first productions back after the shutdown. And just the life and the excitement of being in the same room with people on top of, creating that scene and just working with that music. There just must have been something so magical and special about a moment like that.
That was one of the most magical moments. Boho Days was this magical moment in the middle of making our movie. Yeah. We filled the apartment with people who all had quarantined so they could be in the scene with Andrew Garfield live singing. And so it did feel like a party. I wanted to make sure we could move 360 degrees around his apartment. So everything was lit with either practicals or light coming from outside so that if everyone there felt like they were at a party, and no one had been at a party in 7-8 months. And the incredible joy it was to be in that space where, it was hot and sweaty and just like a little teeny New York apartment in the middle of winter packed with people. And that's the energy was there. And it was wonderful.
Now, I remember when you were on for In the Heights, we talked about filming in really congested areas. And I know a lot of that was practical. Like you shot a lot of locations practically. Did you also shoot a lot of practical locations for Tick, Tick, Boom?
It was a mix, but like Jonathan's apartment was built on a soundstage, we were trying to recreate a lot of locations that existed in 1990, and so the Moondance Diner was built because it no longer exists in New York, and Jonathan's apartment was built, although it does exist. It's a 5-floor walk up with a teeny staircase. We did shoot it's at 508 Greenwich Street in New York. We shot in the hallway, so the stairwells looked exactly like the stairwell in the movie. That was real. But then when they go into the apartment, we recreated it, and it's still built to the exact same size as the existing apartment is.
So you didn't even give yourself the luxury of having extra space on a studio set. I love that discipline.
We did not. Well, in many ways, it's such a personal story and representation of Jonathan. And we knew Andrew was giving it his all while we were prepping the movie. And so when we were working with the production designer, and Lynn and I were working with the production designer, we all three realized it was really important to be as true to Jonathan Larson's life as possible in many areas, and let Andrew have the freedom to be in that space. And I remember the first time Andrew walked into the apartment set, and I just stood in the corner of a room. It was only a few of us in the apartment. It was me and Lynn and the AD. And I just watched him like tangibly touch things like the lamp above his bookshelf. And he was exploring. And while he was exploring, then I started doing the lighting as he started moving through the space. So the gaffer was outside, and we just started working on, we had a camera just placed, and we just started working on how we were going to bring the light in based on how Andrew was moving through the space.
What did he do while moving through the space that inspired your lighting?
It just was this feeling of loving his computer and loving his tapes and the way he moved through the space and his connection to everything, including paintings on the wall that were actually really Jonathan Larson's. And Andrew wore, during prep, Andrew wore this blue flannel shirt that he wears in the movie in a couple of scenes. But that's actually Jonathan's real shirt. Oh, wow. And all through prep, I watched Andrew transform into Jonathan. And I remember this one day when I knew it had happened. We were all watching Sunday in the Park with George, the PBS version that they filmed in a long time ago. And I was sitting behind Andrew and Robin De Jesus, and I saw Andrew look over at Robin, and I was like, he became Jonathan. And I snapped a picture and sent it to Lynn.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, it must be a little bit tricky when you're portraying somebody that people know of, but don't necessarily know their mannerisms. Like Jonathan wasn't really a celebrity in the way that, you know, if you were portraying somebody that everybody knows that's like already famous, you're portraying someone that first of all died before they became famous. And you also, you don't really see them very much, but I think you guys did a really good job of embodying what we perceive to be Jonathan. Does that make sense? Like there's a thought about what he may be like. Yes. Like you say, like us, we have cameras on us all the time, including at this moment in time. And if someone wanted to make a movie about us in 30 years, they could probably easily watch it and reconstruct our lives. But that wasn't true in the 90s, but it was true for Jonathan. So his very good friend, her father was a documentarian, and she had a Betacam and filmed Jonathan all the time. Oh, wow. And so we had 8 years of footage of Jonathan Larson. And so I just sat for weeks watching footage of Jonathan. No way.
And I slowly fell in love with him. And so you're right. There's some great pictures that have existed in the world, but this like intimate portrayal of a person who had a camera on them all the time, who never in their wildest dreams would have thought that anyone would be watching this footage. And so at the end credits, you see real Jonathan Larson, and there's a couple of moments, but we got footage of him working at the Moondance Diner, and he worked there until 2 months before he passed away. And we've got video of him in his apartment 2 weeks before he died, where he was filming every single item in his apartment because he was very scared there was going to be a fire from that heater that would always blow up. And so he wanted, for insurance purposes, to record everything, all his possessions. So we knew where everything was, and we knew how his voice sounded. But the thing for me, I think I probably told you while I was making In the Heights, I realized during prep, my job was to fall in love with Washington Heights.
Yeah.
And somewhere in the middle of prepping Tick, Tick, Boom and watching this amazing footage, I realized my job was to fall in love with Jonathan Larson. And I fell in love with his joy and his drive and his persistence and his kindness and his love of his friends. And that was all on the videos that we got to watch.
Is that unusual for a cinematographer to have an opportunity or even really be focusing terribly on falling in love with the characters like that? I don't know if I've really had a discussion like this with any other DP where they talked about their love for the characters as much. There's a lot of obviously like respect for the talent and the script and the story and all that, but particularly focusing on just one character and really getting to know that character seems very unique. And I'm wondering how that influenced the way that you shot the film.
So we made very specific choices that sort of fell into place based off this video. The opening and closing shot of the movie are Betacam shots of Jonathan, where we enter his life in this sort of nostalgic VHS quality world, and then go into our real camera, and then seeing him perform on stage. We had all this footage of him performing at the New York Theater Workshop, again, the real Jonathan Larson, that his friend recorded, but her footage was always, from the audience. But for me, I wanted to be there. I wanted to feel what he was feeling. And I wanted to feel what it was like to be Jonathan Larson on that stage performing Tick, Tick, Boom. Mm. And I don't know how other cinematographers do it, but for me, my process was my process, and it was fully jumping into Jonathan Larson's head and story and tell this story from that point of view. I was influenced a lot by this photographer, Nan Golden, who shot tons of stills in New York. She was a New York street photographer, and she also did a lot of self-portraiture during this period of time in New York. She's still a wonderful photographer in New York today. But people could describe her work as a personal journal made public. And that's what Tick, Tick, Boom was to me. Jonathan wrote Tick, Tick, Boom because he couldn't get his other musicals made. And he wrote his own story. He wrote his life story in Tick, Tick, Boom and then made it public. So it was his personal journal, his diary. His music was his diary of his life. And then he made a public performance of it. And so that's where I feel like that was the exciting part, is falling in love with this person and wanting to share that person with the world.
I want to talk a little bit more about Boho Days, specifically because it takes place in his apartment. It's a tight area, and you've got a lot of people in there, and it's a set that you built, as you mentioned before. I want to talk to you about the way that you approach filming claustrophobic locations. Because there has to be just so much challenge to it. And there's a great sort of benefit to it as well. I'm sure there's a real victory in having it work out well. So talk to me about the way that you approach that particular scene, the apartment, and your techniques for claustrophobic locations and making them work.
the sort of the visual language of the film are these tight claustrophobic shots of Jonathan, and some of them are these wide angles, and we're really close to him. I wanted to feel the ceiling and the walls around him. So he felt boxed in. He felt trapped. He's trapped by the diner. He's trapped by his apartment. He's trapped by his girlfriend, and he's trapped by his best friend selling out. And like, what are the choices? Susan represents one choice for Jonathan, and Michael represents another choice for Jonathan. And then he has his dream. And so all these claustrophobic shots build up. And so when we do go into his dreams, they are expansive, and life is slower and calmer, and he can think in scenes like swimming, where everything's super, super cutty. And then when he sees that 30 at the bottom of the pool, the H, he's so scared of turning, and he goes and he touches it and turns into a treble clef, and everything slows down, and he can finally hear his music. Or on Sunday, everything's really, really choppy, cut, handheld. And then when his mind finally quiets, we start to widen out and grow, and you have these beautiful, big, expansive, bright, sunny shots. And then in Boho Days, it is that claustrophobic feeling but there's a different energy in Boho Days, because you've got so many people around him that even though you're in this tight space, I think we had something like 20 extras in that very small living room, and plus our principal cast, and it feels what a New York City apartment party would have felt like in those days, when you're 29 years old.
Yeah. And there are those moments, like you have his claustrophobic locations. Everything's tight, everything's a little constrained, but there's still a warmth and a love there. But when you get these moments of bigness and openness, two in particular, I know you mentioned swimming, so I guess there's three. I'm sure there's more, but the ones that stuck out to me were Sunday is the number where diner. You're in the diner, right? Yes. Mm-hmm. And so there's a moment in that where the wall comes down and the set opens up, and you are then faced with this wide, beautiful sunlight streaming. It's warm. Things have slowed down. And it really does put you kind of into the mind of Jonathan at that moment. Talk to me about that approach and what sort of led you to that sort of expansive, wide, warming shots for those moments.
It's probably one of the warmest scenes in the movie, and it's definitely the brightest scene in the movie. So when you're inside and everything's closer, and then when he pushes the wall down and he steps out onto the wall of the Moondance Diner has now become a theatrical stage, and the sunlight has become basic. The way I motivated it was that sun was a spotlight hitting him as if he were on a stage. And then the gloomy, cold January that we've been in this whole movie is suddenly gone. The leaves appear on the trees, and there is this warm expanse. And we're inspired by Sondheim Sunday. The numbers inspired by Sunday in the Park with George by Sondheim, which is inspired by the Seurat painting, Sunday on La Grande Jetée. And so when they do step out and into that warmth and into that light, I wanted it to have this very painterly feel to it. So we overexposed everything a little, and the colors get a little bit brighter, and the skin, because I overexposed it, is a little glossier, and it just has that was the goal, is to have this painting inside of New York and also feel the stage presence of it with the sunlight hitting him and obviously all the production design elements that come in.
Yeah, I wasn't even, it's so funny because I wasn't even picking up on the stage part of that, but now hearing that back, I'm like, that is exactly what it was, because he was sort of living his dream at that moment. Even at the very end. Yeah, it's his fantasy.
It's his fantasy. He walked out. It's a future he never got to experience too, which is also the sad part, right? He never sees Bernadette past that moment in time, and he never gets to see Hamilton on Broadway, where all these Broadway legends are there in the scene with him. And it's a future he never experiences, but it is a future that he inspired. And I just got the chills. I just feel an incredible passion for Jonathan.
Doesn't it just make you so sick to your stomach that he didn't get to see any of his works really succeed to the level? I mean, he was certainly successful to get to the point where Rent was live and going to be on stage, but to miss out on the impact that he had is just, it just like makes you mad in a way. It's crazy. Yeah.
And, when you asked me about, it didn't really click till just now, but when you asked me earlier about, telling a story, like falling in love with a character.
Yeah.
It also is, it's such a personal story to me in so many ways. I grew up in New York City I was 10 years old in 1990. My dad was a playwright. We lived in a tenement apartment, very similar size to Jonathan's, with a bathtub in the kitchen. And I would watch my dad's heartbreak over and over and over again because he was trying to make it in theater in New York. And then flash forward to 30 years later when I'm working as a cinematographer, or even the last 20 years of my career, and that idea of never giving up on your dreams, no matter what. And so that story, so Jonathan's story of endurance and getting up and dusting yourself off and starting all over again, even in the face of no, has been part of my journey too. And so that connection felt incredibly personal.
Yeah, I think everybody in this audience, everyone listening to this they're kind of in the creative fields. They kind of get that. They understand that rejection is the fuel of success all the time. And I think that we all here in the Go Creative Show world and just in filmmaking in general can really relate to that story. Even though, he's writing musicals, it is certainly different. But that idea of following a dream and all of the stumbling blocks along the way, all of the closed doors along the way, it's really it's just such a great story. So those of you guys that have been listening for a while, you know that I am obsessed with techniques for lighting night interiors. And on Filmmakers Academy right now, there is an entire course on just lighting night interiors. And it's taught by none other than Shane Hurlbut. And I wanted to bring Shane on real quick to tell you guys something about that course. Certainly go buy the course, become a member, go watch the whole thing because there's going to be so much information in there. But Shane, give us a little something. Give us some tip about lighting night interiors.
Yeah, one of the most difficult things to do when you're dealing with interiors is moonlight sources, right? And because there's always curtains and there's shears, right? Just like there are in most every home. So when you put your moonlight through this, through those white shears, they tend to explode, right? And you're trying to get this fragility of night lighting. So what I do is I just went to IKEA one day and I was like, hey, let me take a look at your stock in silver curtains. With the silver curtains, you can push more moonlight through the windows that doesn't bloom the curtains, and you can actually get an exposure on somebody's face, say in a bed.
I love these tips, and there is so much more in the entire course. So guys, you've got to check it out, filmmakersacademy.com, and make sure you check out the course, Lighting Night Interiors. Let's talk a little bit about the tech, the camera package lighting that you chose. We'll start with cameras and lenses. What did you choose for your camera lens package on Tick Tick Boom?
So we used a Panavision DXL2 for our camera, and we shot two cameras mostly because, again, we were in tight spaces, and there were a few 3-camera days, but for the most part, 2 cameras. And then we also had a Betacam that we used for the Betacam footage and a Super 8 camera for the Super 8 footage. And then lenses, we used Panavision G series anamorphic lenses.
So you did shoot anamorphic. You can sort of tell because of like the imperfections in the bottom edges of the frame, which I think really adds to the kind of look of the 90s. It's interesting to me because some people are using anamorphic now. It's a big topic here on Go Creative Show. Our audience is always interested in why people choose anamorphic, what it does for them creative-wise. But there is kind of a 90s element to it in its imperfection. I mean, anybody that has lived through the 90s, or at least if you're young enough to, or if you're old enough to have lived through it, or young enough to be now in the 90s revival, looking back at it with admiration, you know that there was a lot of imperfections in the film. I mean, in videos certainly, but even film at the time, there were imperfections in it. And there's something to this embrace of imperfections in a world where everything can be so perfect with all of our technology. It seems like people are really leaning into the qualities of filmmaking that feel tangible and imperfect. Are you getting that sense as well? Is that where the industry's going?
Yeah, I don't know if that's where the industry is going. I actually don't look at current movies when I'm making a movie. I only look at older stuff because I don't want to be influenced or do something just because it's trendy. I want to make sure whatever I'm doing serves the story, and so I make sure I'm not watching anything contemporary. But in terms of our anamorphic lenses, we took the G series anamorphic lenses and then we completely modified them. So if someone went to Panavision and rented the G series lenses, they would not look like the lenses we shot with on Tick, Tick, Boom.
Yeah.
That we really pushed them hard. We wanted them to bloom in this way, and we did things to the elements which made everything feel a little lifted, a little bit if we were shooting film, it would have been considered a fat negative, and that was based off of our lenses. But we really wanted it to feel imperfect and grimy and dingy, and so that those were, when I was talking to Panavision about modifying our lenses, we had conversations about that. I sent them lots of references with New York street photography from the 80s as what I was trying to make the lens and the camera, how those two pieces would create this image that I was going for.
And something that I read while just preparing for this interview is that because of COVID, you weren't able to use atmosphere in the film, so you had to compensate through lensing and filtration. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes. So we did the process with Panavision that they take the lenses and they call it detuning. So you have a perfectly tuned lens and then they mess it up for us. But when COVID hit, we had done all our tests, everything pre-COVID we shot with atmosphere, and then we couldn't use atmosphere. And I still wanted things to have that bloom as if there was just a little bit of smoke in the room. And so because I should say, we were one of the first movies back, and Netflix was really, really so wonderful at keeping us safe. And no one knew how COVID particles would move through atmosphere, if it would linger longer, and also just being uncomfortable wearing a mask and a face shield and being in a thick, smoky environment. So we sent the lenses back to Woodland Hills in California, and they worked on the lenses some more for us. And I actually had one clean set and a clean set meaning not detuned, and one detuned set. And we decided we were detuning all our lenses, that the clean set was not going to work for us. And then we also added an 8th black promise to almost all of the shots as well. And did everything we could to degrade the image in camera and make the light feel as if we did have atmosphere.
When you watch back on it, and do you watch the film now and say to yourself, like, that turned out even better than I expected? Or do you sort of look at it and say, I wonder what this would be if we had done atmosphere? Like, is that something that is that kind of a silver lining in everything that happened? Or do you think back on it in retrospect, say, maybe I would have shot with atmosphere? I'm curious.
At the time, I was really, really nervous about it. We actually did, I think, 3 extra days of camera tests before we started filming again. because I was trying to figure out tricks to make it feel like atmosphere was in the room. And then the space I was most concerned about losing atmosphere for was the New York Theater Workshop, where he's performing on the stage.
Yeah.
And so visual effects and I and the producers and Lynn, we all would have these long, in-depth conversations about what do we do. And finally, what we did was we shot, one, I aimed the lights in certain ways. So some of the shots felt like they had atmosphere, but some of the wider shots just didn't look like it. And so everyone, the dimmer board operator stayed. We filmed 7 days, and the dimmer board operator kept all my lighting cues. And then a second unit came in, and they pumped the space through, filled with air, smoke, and they did different setups. So we had plates for what the atmosphere would have been in each of my lighting setups. And then they were able to marry those together. So the atmosphere in New York Theater Workshop, even though we didn't shoot with it with the cast in the space, it is real atmosphere. It's just married.
That's wild. So yeah, because you do see the lights. You see them in the show. So
yeah,
so that's
like
cool.
The cones and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I was assuming there was some sort of visual effect trickery going on, because I had, when I heard that you weren't able to use atmosphere, but you can't tell when you watch it. And it's interesting to know that they were plates and not something done in visual effects. It's still visual effects, but you know what I mean.
Right. They didn't it's not animated smoke. It's real. It's real smoke. But what was amazing to me, we knew, it's expensive to add it later. And so we knew there was going to be a fine line between what we could add atmosphere to and what we couldn't. And so the electric team was amazing. Like per shot, we would tip the par cans on the side in this, to make sure we weren't getting terrible anamorphic flare, but still feeling the bloom. And so we had tons and tons of par cans on each side. And so they were really worked it. So in the close-ups, we didn't really use atmosphere at all because we had the bloom from the lights. And
you had the Blackmagic 1/8 Pro Mist on there? Is that what you said?
Not Blackmagic, just Black 1/8 Black Pro Mist.
Black Pro Mist, yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, it looks fantastic. You would, like you had mentioned, it really does have that kind of like grimy sort of hot, even though I know it's January, but it still has like a heat to it in the interior scenes and a warmth to it that I think just looks great. Were you considering any other camera package prior to choosing the Panavision?
Oh, absolutely. We went to Panavision and tested lots of cameras. I always do it before a movie, but I have shot on this camera 3 times now. I love it. And and Panavision has been the most amazing rental house to me since I was in film school. And so we went to Panavision and, I'll backtrack. I asked Lynn, this is his directorial debut. I asked Lynn, how involved he wanted to be in picking a camera and lens. And he said, I want to know everything. And so I went and shot tests and put lenses on and shot spherical, shot anamorphic. And then we go on different camera bodies and we went to the lab and it was a blind test for Lynn. He has it was amazing because he has no allegiance to a certain brand or any sort of preconceived ideas about different companies. And so he the way we picked the lenses and camera was I would listen to what he was attracted to. And I don't know if it's because he had been watching dailies In the Heights for so long and it was the same camera, but In the Heights and Tick, Tick, Boom look like night and day, movies. So
I want to talk about the way that you approach the New York Theater Workshop scenes. And then also I'm probably saying, I don't remember the terminology, but when he's doing the Superbia, was that also a workshop as well? When he was doing
It's very confusing. So the New York Theater Workshop is the stage part, and it's actually just the name of the theater. Okay. And then the workshop is when they're in with those cathedral windows.
Yes.
In the white space or beige space with the windows.
So in addition to the musical performances, I guess for lack of a better word, in the show, in the movie, you also have actual performances, one of Superbia and one of Tick, Tick, Boom. But they're not presented in a way that people think about live stage performances because it's before the show would even hit the stage. So you're kind of bringing a unique perspective that a lot of people don't really understand happens in musical theater. So talk to me about the way that you filmed those moments, because you're sort of exposing like the way that people would be exposed to a writer's room or something like that, like the kind of behind the scenes work that gets done before the play actually comes to life is what you're highlighting. Yes.
And Lynn, like on day one, we were scouting and it was December 2019. And he said to everyone, the Superbia workshop cannot feel like a movie version of what a workshop is. He said, I've sat in workshops for the last 20 years. It needs to feel like a real workshop. He's like, I've never, or I don't know if he said I never, but he's like, most of the time when you see workshops depicted on film or TV, it doesn't feel like what they really are. And so he didn't want like this glossy space. He wanted it to feel like what a space would be, like, an empty room with a piano and not much design elements in it. And he wanted, so that realness was really important to him. And then what we did, the Superbia workshop takes place over 5 days. And so all of those shots that we did throughout the workshop are all very specifically storyboarded transitions to build as the musical gets better and grows as the musical gets better. But there are all these sort of lyrical flowing shots as you hear the music into, it's called sextet, as you hear the music as we would transition through things as to Jonathan's apartment, to his swimming pool as he's swimming, back to the theater. And we did it in this really flowy way.
Yeah. And you're saying Lynn wanted these workshops to feel as authentic as possible, not these glorified kind of movie versions of it. But you still are tasked with making them beautiful. Like they have to look good. So there's two different looks to these workshops. You have the Superbia workshop and the New York Theater workshop of Tick, Tick, Boom. They look very different, but they have a similar kind of feel about them. Let's start with the Superbia one, because that one, we're talking about right now, but also that one I think is the most bare of the two. Mm-hmm. And it's daylit. So talk to me about the way that you approach that to make it look authentic, but also, make it look rich and feel like it's part of the film that you're making.
So the movie, the Superbia starts out somewhat dreary, overcast outside and like a gloomy January day where you don't want to be outside. And as the workshop progresses through the week to the ultimate moment where you see Vanessa Hudgens singing Come to Your Senses, the light starts to get a little bit more magical. The way we lit it was we had a huge light on the building, on the roof of the building across the street, bringing it in, but we didn't bring it in at the beginning. We used the fluorescents above to start, and then we started turning those off. And then we started, and then we started just letting the daylight start to feel like it was coming in. And then we started putting the the huge light across the street into the window, but we softened it so that it wasn't hard. And then when Vanessa sings, it's, full glorious backlit magic.
I love that because it all is motivated from the same window, really daylight lit, but you have such a different feel throughout every time that we're in that room. It's just such a great way of approaching that scene. And I love that breakdown. So thank you for that. Now talk to me about the New York Theater workshop, which is essentially you keep coming back to one performance that is just kind of happening throughout the show.
Yeah, so it's the frame of our movie. It is him on the stage performing Tick, Tick, Boom, the musical he ends up writing. And so we have all this footage of him really performing it. And when Lynn and I started discussing it, I said, do we have lighting liberties or do you want it just to look like the video that we have? And he said, no, we do have creative liberties, but I do want to make sure it feels like a guy who can't afford to have a performance. Like he doesn't have a ton of money. It's it's a one-man show. I mean, it's a one-night only show. They didn't spend a gazillion dollars lighting it. And so what we did was we actually ended up renting the lights from New York Theater Workshop instead of bringing in our own. It was a way to, give back to the theater community, which was suffering at the time because all of theater was closed. And so we rented as much as we could. So all the park hands and the Licos on the sides were all the theater, and the HMI follow spot, those were all the theater. And then we put these little birdie lights, footlights at the bottom front of the stage. And those were the gaffers owned those. So the gaffer owned those. So, but what we did do, so we had a very simple lighting, but what we did do was each song is different. Sometimes the lights are super bright and hot, and sometimes we dim them off. And sometimes we'd half dim them so they got warmer. So all of the feeling that you feel, all the changes are just simple up and down on the dimmer board.
Yeah, it's interesting because you do sort of feel like you've seen two shows when you watch this movie. You feel like you've seen the Tick, Tick, Boom performance on the stage, and then you also certainly have seen the film as well. But you're constantly cutting back and forth between a whole bunch of scenes. You're always leaping out of, because Tick, Tick, Boom is about his life. So you'd see the performance of it on stage, and then you'd see the corresponding moment in his life that reflects what he's talking about and singing about on stage. So there's a lot of jumping around, and editorially, it's just really well done. But when you have that many cuts, when you have so many different scenes happening at the same time, what sort of challenges does that bring to you as a cinematographer as you're planning your shots?
Early on, we realized it was figuring out our transitions between the stage and 1990 real life Jonathan, and then 1990 musical dream world Jonathan, all needed to be very meticulously thought through, and because we didn't want suddenly for him to be in some musical number in his apartment. And so we did work very specifically on transitions, whether it's we're on the stage and we wrap around to the back of the head, and then we cut to the back of Jonathan in his apartment, and he's dancing through his apartment with Michael, and it's the first time you're in a musical number in that apartment, or you're at the Strand bookstore and it starts with this conversation with Susan and Jonathan, and then the next time we cut, it's this musical performance where all I did there was select the colors of the books, and we heightened them a little when we went to the musical number. But everything, the choices we made, we decided needed to be elegant, specific, and simple. We didn't want there to be these trickiness that suddenly made you jump out of the movie. We wanted it all to feel completely sewn together perfectly.
And it really isn't flashy. Like, I think people have an idea of what a musical would be with the glitz and the glamour and the bigness and the over-the-topness. It really doesn't do that. I think the only time you have a slight touch of that is Sunday, when at the end of it, where you have like the lights and the diner kind of becomes what looks like maybe the front of a theater or something like that. But other than that, it feels very grounded all the time throughout the whole movie, whether it's a performance or whether it's kind of the more, traditional film, dialogue scenes. And I think you guys did a really good job of keeping it grounded all the way through.
And one of the biggest compliments I get for the movie is from people who say they don't like musicals, but they loved our movie because it doesn't feel like a musical. And so I love musicals, and completely love musicals, but the idea that people who it's just a genre they don't love can still get into the movie and love it and feel so connected to Jonathan Larson, and that feels like that. It just feels incredibly wonderful when people say that who aren't fans of musicals.
What was your favorite scene to shoot?
Oh my gosh. I guess swimming was probably my favorite to shoot.
You love filming pools, don't you?
I do love filming pools. It's so much, they're so challenging. This pool was remarkably challenging.
Why?
But the reason I love it is we searched for a swimming pool in New York City, and were like, this is it, because the bottom of there's tiles at the bottom of the pool that look like staff paper lines. And the script actually wasn't written where you see the notes coming out. This was a discovery process.
Oh.
And we go and we look at the pool. We kept going back and back and back. I take my iPhone and dunk it under the water. And well, it was pre-COVID, so people were all in the pool swimming together. And I was just exploring what it would be like under the water. And we played the videos back at our storyboard sessions, and there was a 30 at the bottom of the pool, and Lynn goes, wait a minute, what if he touches the 30, the age he is so scared of turning, and it turns into a treble clef? And that was the birth of Sunday, where the notes appear. And then suddenly we had to figure out how to make that work. And that was one of the challenges that Lynn brought to us that we got to rise to.
Yeah, that overhead shot of the pool with the lines in there, it was so perfect. I thought to myself, that has to be added in post, because it was too perfect. Like, how are you going to find that exact pool? But it sounds like you did.
But not only that, Jonathan, we found out weeks later, after we had been going to the pool so many times, that was the pool Jonathan swam in every day of his life.
No
so
way.
When he wrote Sunday, it was about the swimming pool. And that's why I felt so connected to the pool. It always felt like Jonathan was right there with us, whispering in our ears, guiding us in some direction to tell his story and share his legacy.
How, what is the response you're getting from Rent fans, Jonathan fans, family, friends of his? How are people responding to this telling of his story?
Well, luckily we had his sister. She's one of the producers, Julie Larson, on set with us every day. And we also, during all the research phase that the art department did, we got to meet with a lot of his friends and talk to his friends, and as we started to build and recreate his life, and they would give us possessions of his. So like the Casio keyboard was actually Jonathan's.
Oh, wow.
And the that director's chair in that he sits in at his desk was Jonathan's. So we made sure to include people who were so close to him in our research. And I think everyone is who knew Jonathan and loved Jonathan, and his family are just wildly happy about the movie.
As we wrap up our conversation, I want to ask you a question about advice for filmmakers that want specifically to perhaps get into musicals, more music videos, things that are more music related. You've done at least 2 of them now, and it seems like you've really, tuned your work and your craft perfectly to this style of filmmaking. What advice do you give to people out there that want to get into this sort of work?
So this moment in my life is something I've been working to my whole career. I grew up loving musicals. I watched musicals all the time. We had every single Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movie on VHS. And that's what we were allowed to watch when we came home after school. And The Sound of Music, I just watched it this weekend with my daughter, and just all the great classic musicals. We had coffee table books about the MGM musical. And so that it was always a complete love and passion of mine to one day get to make a musical. Just one. That's all I wanted. And then I met John Chu in film school, and we did When the Kids Are Away, which was a musical short film at USC. And then we bonded over our love of musicals. So I found someone who loved musicals as much as I did. And then a few years later, we started making this series called The Legion of Extraordinary Dancers. And I remember I was at the Obama inauguration, and I get the first one, and I get a phone call from John going, okay, I've got this passion project I want to do. He's like, it's about superheroes whose superpowers are dance moves, and we have no money. Do you want to do it? He's like, you need to be in LA in 2 days. And I said, absolutely, I'm there. And it was... We shot it over 3 years. It ended up being 30 episodes, and we made huge mistakes doing the show, and we learned and we challenged each other, and we really, it was a sandbox for how do you tell a story through music and dance. And that has led us to lots of different projects, including In the Heights, and then for me, Tick, Tick, Boom.
So the advice there is just
jump into a sandbox. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no matter what, right? All you need is an iPhone. You don't need anything except this was something else I would do, is like go to ballet classes and watch people dance and move, and then find dancers that you can just start to film and learn from, because it is the only way to do it is to practice.
Yeah, I'm curious. Is there like a particular skill set that's uniquely that's something that a skill that somebody should hone that really would come in handy when they're doing, musical films? Even if you can't do musicals, any action and musicals are so similar. You've got either a fight choreographer, a dance choreographer, a stunt choreographer, and a dance choreographer. And the camera becomes part of that choreography. And so even doing any sort of action really would also help. Well, perhaps an action film is next in you'll be back on the show for some big, huge summer blockbuster. I'm sure that's going to be the next thing.
Fun.
Well, it's out there in the universe now, so something will happen. Alice, thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking to you. I'm so glad you came back. The film is awesome. Tick, Tick, Boom. It's on Netflix, and you all have Netflix. I mean, come on. Go watch the film. You will love it. Let us know what you think of the film and this episode. And Alice, where can people find you? I know you get your Instagram. What do you want to plug before we go?
Instagram _Alice Brooks _
There you go. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. Alice, thank you so much for coming on Go Creative Show, and I'm already excited for your next big project.
Thank you so much.
All right, I want to thank Alice Brooks for coming on the show, the director of photography of Tick, Tick, Boom on Netflix. I loved it. You guys will too, so check it out for yourself. I also want you to check out Filmmakers Academy, our sponsor. We absolutely love those guys. The courses are so well done, so much information packed in there, and I'm so grateful and happy that they are supporting the show. Head over to gocreativeshow.com/Filmmakers Academy, and don't forget to get your 10% off discount by using code GOCREATIVE10. You get 10% off of the all-access membership with that, GOCREATIVE10. So don't forget to do that. I also want to thank our producer, Connor Crosby. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com. And Dave Siegel from siegelsound.com. He mixes and masters and makes the show sound so good. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. If you want to follow me and find out what I'm doing, you can find me on Instagram at Ben Consoli. Thank you guys for joining us today, and we will see you next week on another episode of the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.